Hello, my beloved listeners. I'm with you again this week, and I've got a very, very special episode this week covering a topic that does come up in a lot of stories, but we're really going to focus on what happens when things don't go to plan. And this particular episode was prompted by a beautiful Laura, one of my mothers, who wrote me the most incredible poem about her birth. And I asked permission if I could read the poem, and she's also agreed to be with us here today. It's a very, very powerful, powerful episode. So thank you, Laura, for agreeing to be here.
It's my pleasure.
All right. So you were pregnant. What sort of preparation did you do, and how are you feeling about the prospect of giving birth?
Yeah, so I think I left a bit of preparation later than what I would have expected from myself. I'm usually a very, plan and get all the information and collect everything before you step into it kind of person.
Mm.
But to be honest, I was just sort of enjoying the ride of pregnancy. And all of a sudden it got to, 6 months, 7 months, and I started thinking, oh gosh, I'm actually going to have to birth this child at some point. So
Mm.
I did the birth classes through public hospital, which was just sort of part and parcel of I guess the birthing process through them. I did the Transform Your Birth class with the lovely Tracy, which was the weekend workshop, and I also listened to a few podcasts, which were so there was the Great Birth Rebellion,
Yeah.
which was these two lovely ladies talking, a lot of the facts, figures, and science and evidence behind birth practices, and what's an old wives' tale and what's true and what's changed. And I really liked the evidence base behind
Mm.
that. That worked well with that part of my brain. But then I also listened to Australian Birth Stories, which was just a whole bunch of lovely women talking about the variety of experiences that they had. And for me, that was great because it sort of opened my eyes to, I guess, what options are available, and what can happen, and helped me feel a bit more prepared for, some of
Mm.
the weird and wackies, but also what I could control, what I could do, and I guess learn from some of the highs and lows that other women had gone through as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Storytelling is always powerful. It's why we primarily use stories as well for women who were well prepared. And preparation is a wonderful thing, getting your head around it, getting, an understanding of what the potentialities are, what's possible in this space.
Mm.
But as I always say, we can't control birth, and we're really walking into the mystery. So we have to get our heads around the fact that we just don't know what's going to happen on the day. And there are things you can do that can really down-regulate stress. It's a very big focus of what I do, getting partners on board, helping them to understand their role, creating a birth plan, a birth map, or birth preferences, helping to communicate to your carers who you are and what's important to you. These are all things that can really make a big difference on the day. But as Laura's going to share with us, it doesn't always go to plan. So, after doing that preparation, how are you feeling coming up to the birth?
Um, I was so ready to give birth. It's actually something I had been sort of thinking about, dreaming about, wanting to do since I was far too young to be thinking about it. I had, most of my life, the idea of being
Mm.
a mum was up there with my dreams, and the actual process of pregnancy and birth was a really important part of that, and I guess a bit of a rite of passage that I wanted
Yeah.
to take part in. So, having done those levels of prep, I definitely, 2 or 3 weeks out from my due date, I felt not ready. I don't think you can ever really feel ready for birth because it is
Yeah.
still this big unknown. But I was excited by it. I had, talked to my partner, as you said, the partners and supports. We had so many conversations about, do's and don'ts and preferences, and how he felt about it, how I felt about it. We'd really sort of worked through a lot of our, independent and joint feelings about it, so that we had got to
Mm.
a point where, you know, I knew what he would need, he knew what I would need, he knew how to respond to my needs. I felt like I completely trusted him going into that process.
Yeah.
So I was, yeah, I was ready. Bring on the
Ready.
baby.
Game
Let's
on.
do
I
it.
want this baby.
Yes.
All right. Well, let me now read this poem. Hold on to your seats, people, because this is just the most exquisite story. It's called The Birth She Didn't Plan. Her waters broke in the waking of the day. Sheets damp with the first promise of the life she had carried for so long. She laughed, startled, giddy, a hand on her belly as if to say, finally, we're really doing this. The surges began slowly, soft at first, pulling her inward like a tide. She moved with them, riding the rhythm she'd read about, visualized through months of quiet preparation. Breathe in, breathe out, the grounding touch of her partner's hand. She swayed, breathed, moaned into movement. There was pain, yes, but also power. A primal fire she'd prepared for, innately knew and trusted. For 24 hours she laboured at home. Time lost its shape. There was only the dance of contraction and rest, pain and surrender. But the baby stayed curled inside, not yet ready to meet the world. She made the eventual journey to the hospital, not with fear, but with the promising anticipation of the guided journey to come. She walked in thinking she would soon walk out with her child in her arms. This is what she had prepared for, and she was ready. She had a plan, a birth plan, her wants and dreams made bare for the world to see, neatly written, folded like a prayer. It lived in her bag next to the muslin wraps and hopes. She walked through the doorways she'd thought would lead to calm. Instead, a monitor was strapped to her belly, a needle pushed into her vein. Too many wires, machines that hummed louder than intuition, a drip to get things going, a belt to track her baby's every beat. This wasn't the soft landing she'd imagined, but she stayed with it, breathed through it, focused inward where her body and her baby still moved together. This was still her journey. She waited. She hoped. The drip began, and so did a different kind of labour, no longer wild, intuitive, and free, instead manufactured and monitored. Beeping filled the room, sharp, insistent, marking time in tension. Each flicker on the screen a summons back from the quiet place she'd fought to stay in. As the contractions intensified, she slipped into herself, eyes closed, jaw loose, riding the roar with ancient determination. She stopped speaking, and the world narrowed to the space behind her eyes. She found strength in silence, in surrender. The hours dragged on. Her baby's heart, so small and precious, skipped in worry. A flicker, then a dip, a whisper of danger in the monitor's hum. She remained rooted, a quiet focus set into her bones. He held the straw to her lips, fed her bites between contractions, shared soothing words, caring for her so she could give everything to the life still waiting within her. But her body, brave and miraculous, opened no further. She waited. Still she hoped, but the exhaustion came creeping, muscles trembling, mind frayed. Every surge now a storm without shelter. A tiny heartbeat faltered. A nurse's brow furrowed, a doctor's voice changed tone. She asked for the epidural, her voice barely a whisper, her voice barely reaching the surface from where she'd gone inside herself. Her decision resolute, but searing. She spoke the words, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. The decision tasted like grief. She had dreamed of water and whispers, of catching her child in her own bare hands. But there was power in her choice, even as her plans unravelled. And it came. Relief, yes, but also a kind of mourning, a quiet farewell to the soft, natural birth she had dreamed of, a surrender etched in weary, steadfast love. Now flat on her back, legs numb, machines breathing for her rhythm, she waited, waited for the change, for dilation, for a baby to descend. But the numbers remained still and the heartbeat faltered again. Still she hoped, still she waited. Hours later, no progress, only fatigue, only fear, only the look in her partner's eyes when the room filled again with urgency, polite panic behind professional masks. A decision had to be made. Her baby, her love, was no longer safe within her. Exhaustion, distress, risk, caesarean. She heard the words, and with trembling strength she said yes. She said yes to safety, to love over pride, to letting go of everything except the need to bring her child here alive, even if it meant meeting her with the body cut and her eyes closed. She said yes, not out of defeat, but of unimaginable courage. To be cut, to be emptied, to be scarred, to be absent from the moment she had waited 9 months to meet. She clutched her partner's hand until they took it from her. It was not the way she imagined. No candlelit pushing, no tidal wave of effort ending in breath and relief. Instead, a blur of lights and the chill of steel. A stranger's hand where she thought only love would touch her. The lights, the smell, the nurses and doctors talking around her, the countdown, the mask, and then sleep. A sleep not of rest, but of loss and hope and fierce, exhausted trust. A dark veil between her and her child's first breath. She woke in a different world alone, not to a cry or tiny heartbeat, but to the whir of machines, to the ache of absence and the fire of not knowing. A nurse, a curtain, an ache that pulsed deeper than pain. She reached down, no belly, just a bandage, a silence, a hollowed place where her child had been. And she was alone. For minutes, hours, time refused to answer. She stared at the ceiling, arms empty, mind spiraling with questions no one was there to answer. She pictured her husband holding their baby, or worse, not holding her. The silence was deafening, a waiting room to torture the soul. Then the hum of wheels, the door opening, and there they were. Her partner's arms cradling a bundle of life, tiny fingers peeking from the wrap. A baby, her baby, eyes closed, mouth soft, wrapped in love and waiting. Oh. She wept then, not just for joy, but for all she had endured to reach this moment, for the plan lost, the pain buried, the choices made in love and necessity. She held her at last, skin to skin, heart to heart, not as she had planned, but as she had willed, through every twist, every letting go. The bond did not begin at birth, it had always been there, but now it found arms and breath and warmth. In that moment, no path mattered but this one. No detour was wrong if it led to this breath, this gaze. No decision could be regretted with those small hands wrapped around her finger, every sacrifice softened by the weight resting on her chest. She hadn't pushed her into the world, but she had fought for her, opened herself in the most vulnerable of ways. A mother, still a warrior in surrender, and in that scar, still fresh, was the story of her strength. This was not the birth she had wanted, but it was the birth that brought her child safely to her arms. There is a quiet heroism in letting go to hold on. And that is a kind of triumph only the fiercest hearts understand. In the quiet days that followed, she began to feel the weight of all that she had held at bay, the fear she had buried to stay steady, the exhaustion that had curled itself into her bones. She grieved the birth she had imagined, the dimly lit room, the water, the steady rhythm of breath and body. Those dreams had lived for longer than her pregnancy, woven into her expectations like a lullaby she'd sung in advance. She mourned her body too, its softness stretched, its strength tested and scarred. The image of herself as she had hoped to be stood by beside the woman she now was. And she had to learn to honour them both. And yet, when she looked back, she did not flinch. The story did not leave her feeling broken. Every step, every shift, every tear was made with care, with strength, and with love. She had held each moment long enough to follow her path with open eyes. There had been loss, but never failure. It was not the birth she had wished for, but it was hers. She had given everything so her child could arrive safely. And in doing so, she had birthed not just a baby, but a deeper version of herself. It was traumatic, but she was not traumatized. She was transformed. Mm. Oh, Laura, what a powerful, powerful birth story. The loss of hopes and dreams, and yet the transcendent of woman becoming mother. Mm. So, having heard that again,
Mm. It's different hearing someone else read it.
yeah,
Mm.
I'm sure it is.
And I don't know, it feels so surreal, I think, hearing you read it back. Um, sorry, I'm gonna try and get through this conversation. Yeah, no, it was, as you've read, it was a journey, and preferences and plans are talked about so much,
Yeah.
and I think it is great that there is less emphasis now on having a specific one directional linear plan, because your will is is sort of irrelevant in that situation. But it it was a lot, and to be honest, hearing it back sort of makes me realize that the birth itself was tough, but I really did go into this place everyone talks about, where your mind, it knows how to protect itself and knows how to focus in, and your body really does know what to do.
Mm.
Which, when people said that before going into birth, it sounded like I understood it but didn't understand it.
Yeah.
I knew that my body was going to do what it was going to do, but it really was this primal mindset, and you go into this space where you you know what's happening and what's going on and what feels right and what feels wrong, even though you've never done any of it before. Um, and I think coming out of that, the there's this strange duality that you kind of experience where, I don't really have, I guess, regrets about the process. I was quite lucky that every time something happened that wasn't, you know, I guess the plan, I did have a little bit of time to process it and make that decision. The midwife that I had um, made sure that
Mm,
I had time. If there were doctors around saying, you need to do this or you need to do that, or cesarean's the way to go, she
mm,
actually forced them out of the room and said, does this need to happen right now? And they said,
mm,
no, we've got a bit of time. She went, all right, leave. Laura she needs to make this decision herself. And I don't have, regrets. I don't look back on the process, feeling traumatized, as I said in the poem. You know, I, everything that happened had to happen. You
mm.
know, I couldn't have followed my plan. My child would probably not have survived the original plan. So there was never a choice in that sense. But
Yeah.
even though I don't feel negatively or traumatized by the experience, I absolutely still grieve it,
Mm,
which is an interesting, I guess, yeah, duality to sort of try and process because
yeah.
everyone says, oh well, you've got a healthy baby, so you did well, move on,
Mm,
time to be a parent now. Um,
yeah.
and you do, you have to start parenting, but it's something that I do still grieve. Oh gosh, I'll try and keep
Mm,
it together, I promise. I do still grieve it. I
yeah.
spent a long time imagining what that moment would be like.
Mm,
And I don't feel like I failed, because I know that a lot of people use that language, that they couldn't do it. And, you know, every now and then I joke with my husband about it as a way of, sort of coping and getting through it. But it's, it's really hard to process your thoughts and feelings about a birth postnatal because you don't have time.
mm,
All of a sudden your entire focus, 9 months you've been thinking about birth and labor and what that's going to look like and planning and preparing for it. And then, within a few hours or a few days in my case, all of a sudden that becomes irrelevant and it's done and it's finished. And then you've got this beautiful life in front of you that you need to care
mm,
for. And yeah, that I'm obviously, as people may or may not hear, I'm still quite emotional about it now. And I think it's something I will be, grieving and processing for a while, but that's okay.
mm, mm,
It's kind of like any, dream you might have. It may not happen the way you expect it to, and you might be totally fine with the outcome, but that doesn't mean you can't be a bit sad that you didn't get what you planned for.
mm. Thank you, Laura, for sharing that because the process of going through anything intense like that, trauma, they say, is too much too soon for too long without support. And there was a lot of care and um, intentional space created for you to adjust through all of the different twists and turns. And I really do believe that midwife was very, very wise in how she gave you the time and the space to get your head around, okay, we're going from this plan now to this plan. And that's really important. And when we make comments like, oh, well, you got a healthy baby, we're totally discounting the process of the woman's journey to get there. And in my experience too, watching women go through this, they do need time, and birth stories morph. They um, they take on different shapes and different things that come to the surface. Comes from a deep, intuitive, intrinsic inner wisdom of your whole body and being making sense of what happened and dealing with all the different feelings that come with that. And I love that you're giving yourself permission to really, I mean, it just reeks. It's come all through your writing. It's coming through what you're sharing today. And I have no doubt there's been many moments through these months with your beautiful little Riley where you've had those feelings come to the surface. And I can only suggest to people to give voice to that and to trust the inner healing process that is innate in all of us. We have the capacity to heal, but the things that get in the way of that are other people's opinions, our beliefs that we should just get on with it. We've got a healthy baby. We should be grateful. Um, Move on. Sometimes just the intensity of parenting causes us, we just can't open that Pandora's box, and that's okay. Timing is everything. But listening to the way you're describing your process, it sounds like you've been pretty raw and open through the whole these few months. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I was quite lucky, and this wasn't the plan. The original plan was that I'd have 3 or 4 weeks with my husband and my beautiful baby at home alone, just the two of us. Obviously, plans changed, and my lovely mother ended up staying with us for the first sort of 2 and a bit weeks,
Mm.
and she had had a not too dissimilar experience in birthing me than I had with my daughter.
Wow.
So I was very fortunate to be able to, um, I guess, almost debrief with
Yeah.
her,
Wow.
which opened up a whole extra level and layer to our relationship, and has been
Mm.
quite important and crucial for me in my healing as well. I did have midwives, as they do, come in for quite a while and check in and talk about the birth and prompt me to. And I guess I've always been the sort of person where if you ask a question and generally want to know, I will answer it. I'm happy to be an open book for people
Mm.
that are willing and wanting to listen. Um, I think the hardest part in talking about it and processing it is, not everyone wants to know. A lot of
Yeah.
people ask, "How was the birth?" And they don't actually want the whole story. They just want to
Mm.
know, good or tough. Gosh, it hurt, but I made it. Yay! And there's so much more to it than that. You don't have a good or a bad experience. There's
Yeah.
so much that happens during that, and there's so many complexities and things that go well and don't, and things that you struggled with but enjoyed, and things that you didn't struggle with but didn't enjoy. And it's such a complex
Mm.
experience to go through. And then people tend to move on very quickly.
Mm.
Once the first few weeks are over, no one really asks how the birth went anymore, because the birth is done. Now they want to know about the baby and how you're going, and
Yeah.
that that obviously makes sense. Not everyone wants to talk about their birth for a really long time, but for me, I was still processing it. I probably still am. I probably will for
Mm.
a while.
Yeah.
I know what happened. I kind of know how I feel about it, but grief is not a quick thing. You don't just acknowledge it and then
Mm.
move on. It takes time.
Yeah.
And I think I struggled with wanting to still talk about it and still process it, but not really having people to continue to do that. And it almost felt as though a lot of the people around me sort of were thinking, oh, you've, you've birthed already. Like, we've already talked about it. Your kid's 2 months, 3 months, or 4 months. Like, why do you keep going back to that? And that was hard. And
Mm.
that is, I think, one of the reasons that I ended up writing this poem, is that I needed a way to sort of pull all my thoughts together, pull the experiences and the emotions and the complexities of it all together, and really take some time to understand how I felt about everything that happened. And the
Yeah.
process of writing this and putting it on paper and seeing the words and thinking, no, that's actually not how I feel. It was more this. And, that really, really helped. um, and yeah, I think I learned a lot from the stories I heard through podcasts, through birth classes, through conversations with friends, and I felt it was important for me to contribute my story as well. I didn't initially have the intent of I guess, publicly contributing it, but putting it out there, even if it's just on a Word document on my laptop, kind of felt like my way of doing that.
Mm.
And I guess when the opportunity came up to, you know, to share it more publicly, I had to, I guess, sort of work up a bit of courage to do that, especially after having had people actually say, "Oh, but you gave birth." That was like 4 months ago, 5 months ago. It felt I almost had to give myself permission to still talk about it, to still feel
Mm.
it, to still, you know, have emotions and thoughts, and that it's okay not to have just moved on from it.
I am so glad you did, my darling, because when I read your email, when I first got it, I didn't have time to sort of sit and read it. And I just got a sense that do this when you have time. And I sat down, and when I finally read it, I was just in tears. But it was this, I got such a strong sense that this story needs to be told. And I asked Laura permission to include it in the education work that I do with midwives and up at the hospitals, and also with student midwives. But also, I asked her if she'd be open to coming on the podcast. And I'm so glad that she did, because, for a long time, I've moved away from labeling stories as good or bad, natural or like, what's the opposite to natural? Unnatural. Like,
Yeah.
I can't even use that language anymore, because it's like we try to put birth in a box, and I'm innately aware that every birth is the welcoming of a child. It's the welcoming of a human soul, and the path that that woman has to walk to get that baby here is a one of a kind, never to be repeated path. And every baby you have is a completely different pathway that you have to walk. And we're not giving birth to a piece of meat, we're giving birth to a human soul. And so there's something very intrinsically sacred and um, of that path. And I always maintain that whatever unfolds on the day is a story worth owning, being proud of, and expressing. Um, and if we are given the gift of listening to a birth story, that we should suspend all judgment and just be in awe of what each woman has had to do to get her baby here safely. So the process now of grieving, often when I've watched this with women in the past, I can see them reclaiming a lot of what got lost, and I can see how it translates into her parenting. What sort of things have you noticed about your walking into the doorway of becoming a mother, and how do you think it's influenced your parenting, Laura?
Oh, great question. I guess the first thing that comes to mind, and I can't decide if it seems so small or so consequentially enormous, but I didn't get the skin to skin with my daughter until almost 2 hours after she was born,
Mm,
and that was, that wasn't the hospital doing weird hospital things. That was just due to the nature of my cesarean and some complications that happened during it, and me having to sort of recover in a recovery bay and be monitored for a while. My beautiful husband did, which is I guess, the silver lining in that he got this amazing moment to to bond with our daughter, who he hadn't had that chance to. She'd been mine for 9 months, and now she was his for 2 hours. But that, that, what they call it, the golden hour, that
yeah.
initial moment of connection that everyone talks about, and how important it is to have that skin to skin connection, and for them to smell and feel you, and it helps with the bonding, and it helps with latching and breastfeeding, and regulation and temperature and health and all these things they talk
Mm,
about. And didn't I didn't get that until, a bit later, and
yeah.
that was something that I really struggled to process, and
Mm,
as you can probably hear in my voice now, I still do.
yeah.
And I I'd had this theory. We all have theories of how we're going to parent, right? And then they all go out the window when you get a kid. I had always sort of said I wanted, yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of the idea of contact naps for whatever reason, whether it was, how I was raised or I don't know,
Mm.
who knows. But it was always in my mind, get baby to sleep in a bassinet, make sure they've got that independence. Um, but coming out of my birth experience, I realized I was so worried that she hadn't bonded with me in that moment
Mm.
and that I'd missed, that point where I became her comfort person, her safety and
Yeah.
security person.
Yeah.
And the first few days, we did actually notice she settled with my husband more than she did with me. And that was a whole other level of I guess, sort of, grief and extension of that birth experience. But coming out of that, I realized just how important it is for me to own those moments of connection with her, to not
Mm.
be so focused on, making sure she's not reliant, making sure she's separate, making sure she's independent, and actually going, you know what, I need this, and she
We
needs
think
this.
it's about the baby.
So
Actually, it's about us too.
it
Yeah.
had nothing to do with her. And I found that, I could almost recover from that, loss of that moment just by really owning and absorbing and living in those moments of connection I had with her. And, contact naps stopped becoming oh gosh, I'm a bad parent. She's never going to be able to sleep by herself again, and started becoming you know, she does feel comfortable with me. She does feel safe with me. She can settle.
Mm.
I am a safe place, and I really got to bring that back. Um, I think the more I talk about it as well, and the more I, share it with other people that have gone through their own versions, and the more I process it, I also realize that, of all the things that I missed, and I say that in air quotes, missed, that I had hoped for, yes, and what a birth would have been beautiful. Yes, seeing my child and holding her the moment she was born, still connected to me, would have been beautiful. But I've also learned just how damn strong I am. That, I I went through 48 hours of,
Mm.
you know, I guess pain is such a simplification of it, but, of this process. And
Mm.
um, I, physically and mentally exhausted myself, but I came out of it and continued on. It didn't break me. So
Mm.
when it comes to my parenting now, I say to my husband, when my beautiful daughter Riley is having a bad day, I go, oh well, I dealt with 48 hours of bad. An hour or two now is not, I can do this. It's fine. And those moments still, you know,
Yeah.
still kind of suck sometimes when they happen. But I feel like I look at myself and what I can
Mm.
handle so differently, and I think it's also made me a bit more, I guess, go with the flow with
Yeah.
how I raise her, and how we parent. And I'm not. I made a plan, and I went into, birth knowing things don't go according to plan, and I'd spend a lot of time saying to myself, these are the preferences. This isn't the plan. These are the preferences, and things will change. And I knew that, but obviously you experience the reality. It's very different, and I still came out of it. Um, and I'll work through how I feel, but I did come out of it. So now, when things don't go the way we planned with Riley, or the parenting style or hack that we had isn't working, I feel like I don't feel quite so wedded to, but it has to, because that's
Mm.
how we talked about it happening. Um, I'm more aware and more accepting that, okay, sometimes it doesn't go that way, and we can find a different way to do it and still be okay. And a really, really, really big part of all of that I put down to my husband, the
Mm.
support that he provided me. You know, I mean, since the day I met him, but through that labor, I intrinsically trusted him. He
Mm.
knew what I needed, when I needed it, how I needed it. We knew how to communicate with each other in that moment. Um, he knew when to take control. I didn't have to make a lot of the decisions because, he was my person for it. And so I, come out of that, and we now have that deeper level of connection, communication that isn't necessarily because of the birth experience, but it was really fortified during that. Um, and to be able to go through some of those ups and downs, and even have him open up on his processing and his grief,
Oh, his
because
experience
while
would
I
be huge.
absolutely, while I experienced it, he watched it happen. He watched the woman he loved go through these ups and downs, and
Mm,
he heard our beautiful daughter's heartbeat drop, and he was the one that was talking to the nurses and doctors, saying, "What do we need to do?" Because he
mm,
knew I couldn't.
yeah.
I couldn't separate myself from that place I'd gone to also worry about her. I just had to do what was right, and what my body knew was right at that moment
Mm,
for her and me. And that wasn't to sit down with the doctor and say, "So, Mr. and Mrs. Doctor, what's happening here, and what do we need to know?" I couldn't do it. Um, and so we kind of got to use that strength to then feed on into how we raise her, um, and knowing that we can get through those weird and wackies and those ups and downs, and we know how to interact when the plan doesn't go according to plan,
mm.
and he knows how I think, and I know how he thinks, and that was kind of unexpected. um, Neither of us thought that the experience with birth would have that much impact on how we parent, um, but it it did. Um, so yeah, I will never be able to reclaim what I had hoped and dreamed, right? But there are absolutely silver linings, positives, whatever you want to call it, that did come out of that experience. I'm a big believer of things happen for a reason, and the things that happen might suck and they might be hard, and you may wish they'd never happened at all, but unfortunately we can't change that. All we can do is try and learn from and grow from it, and find a way to positively let that influence where we go, and I guess that's what we've been able to do with that birth. um,
Your
yeah.
birth did its job, darling. It prepared you for parenting.
It did.
Everything you've said there is so intrinsic to what it is to be a parent of a child, of a newborn, is the realization that we can't control, that we've got to roll with, the importance of getting partners online, the recognition that whilst bonding, I think, and this is one of the pitfalls I think we can have, is the golden hour is the realization of what babies need when they're born. And they need to imprint and be attached to their carers. Once upon a time, we used to whisk babies off and put them in, cribs in nurseries and look at them through glass windows. Thank God we don't do that anymore. But that's what we used to do, because we started to realize that actually babies, they need to regulate, they need to be on their parents, they need that bond and that connection. And the golden hour idea, I think, can set us up for this belief that it's a window of opportunity. And if you miss that window, you're screwed for life and you'll be paying psychology bills. And
And that
it's
was
not the
exactly how
case.
I felt.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. I'm not surprised, because we just want to do our very best. We want everything to be lovely for our children. And we stress about any sort of struggle or separation or whatever that they've had to go through, as well as us. We feel it too. It's not just them that feel it, we feel it. Um, but bonding is a lifelong process. I often say this in my classes is, as a mother of adult children, I am rebonding with my children in adult form now. And I've watched bonding go through phases where they're really connected to you, and phases where they're wanting to avoid you, and everything in between. And it isn't a window of opportunity, it is a lifelong process, but it is the realization that our babies need that connection. And but what you've just described there so beautifully, Laura, is just, is what I would hope for every mother to start to come to terms with, is the idea of not trying to train or mold or make your baby into a certain form like independent or all of these different ideas we get, but to just, what's the word, absorb into this new life and allow yourself to be guided by the experience of this child and what their needs are and what they're communicating and how to respond to them, and being able to draw on the strength that you gain as a result of going through an intense experience like birth is, I guess, the going to give you the backbone that when things get tricky and tough and you don't know what your baby needs and they're unsettled, that you've got this reference point now. If I can bloody birth this baby, I can parent it. And you, my darling, had two births for the price of one. You literally were in labor for a very, very long time, which in itself is a birth. And then you went through a different type of birth. So that's two births. Yeah, I hope you
It's a
realize
lot.
that. It was a
I
lot.
do. I do. I've had
And if you don't think you're
yeah.
strong, oh my God.
What's I guess always been really interesting coming out of it, even in the early days, was having nurses and midwives and doctors tell me I had a traumatic birth.
Yes.
And
I get very
I,
cross at
I
them when they
knew,
do that.
yeah, and I knew a lot had happened. I was there, I experienced it, I
Mm.
went through it. But I didn't realize it was traumatic until people started telling me it was traumatic.
Oh, well,
And
I'm
that was
glad you
such a
know now that it was traumatic.
yeah, absolutely. I'm glad I can add that label to it. But it was so surreal because I guess you'd normally expect it's the other way around, right? You'd expect to come out of it and be like, that was, the most intense thing that's ever happened to anyone, and have people go, oh no, that's totally normal. I had the opposite. Um,
Mm.
I'm just glad that I don't know why. I don't know whether it's just me,
Well,
whether it was my
can we
husband,
unpack that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Unpack that because the most powerful statement at the very end of this poem is, it was traumatic, but she was not traumatized. She was transformed. Just reflect on that for a moment, Laura. What is it about, whether it be you, your preparation, probably the support, like what were the elements or the components that kept you off the land of trauma, because it did have all of the
Mm,
ingredients of a traumatic birth, and it sounds like your carers were a
yeah.
bit traumatized on your behalf.
I think they were. I
Yeah.
actually had three different midwives during
Oh
the labor
wow.
because their shifts ended and someone else
Yeah.
had to tag in. Um, it was definitely not one thing. I think it would be so easy if I could
Yeah.
say, here is the golden key that unlocked the door of not experiencing trauma. But it
Yeah.
wasn't.
What were the
I
elements? What were the threads?
Yeah, my support person.
Yeah.
I have said to so many people and to him, the hardest contractions that I dealt with and the hardest moments for me during that entire labor was the few minutes where he left my side to go tell the nurses and doctors I want an epidural.
Mm.
And it wasn't because I had made the decision for an epidural. That felt good. That felt good knowing I was getting relief. It was
100%.
it was because he wasn't by my side.
Yeah.
And I
So you
felt
anchored yourself to him very
absolutely.
strongly.
And
Yeah.
the difference between having him there and physically present and mentally present versus not was
Mm.
enormous. It was enormous.
Mm.
Um, and I've already talked a little bit through this conversation so far about how pivotal he was during and
Yeah.
after that process. So having that intrinsic trust in
Mm.
him, and knowing that there was a whole part of the birth I didn't even have to think about
Yeah.
because he was there, made a huge difference. And then having him afterwards,
Mm.
having him to talk to, having him to lean on, having him, he had to step up, immensely. We imagined the first, few days being me holding and caring for this beautiful baby and, him being there to support me. Well, I was lying flat on a bed, not able to move for days, He had to care for me and a baby.
What a
So,
man. I bet he's looking very
oh,
attractive.
watching your partner become a parent
A
is,
father,
gosh,
yeah, he's
it is
manned up
amazing.
big
Um,
time. What else?
but there was um, the support network of other mums around me.
Mm-hmm.
None of the and none of my my friends and my mums went through what I went through.
Yeah.
Most of them very, very different, natural
Mm.
births or planned cesareans. I am actually the only person in my circle that had an unplanned cesarean, but having people that had gone through it that I had talked to beforehand to share their stories
Yeah.
and give me their advice and wisdom actually really helped me in that moment because I kept hearing things that they'd said,
Mm.
and little pieces
Wow.
of advice kept going through my mind, um, and the same thing I think from the birth classes and the podcasts. There were moments where I was thinking, oh my gosh, I this is what am I doing wrong? Why is this not happening? Why am I not dilating?
Mm.
Why is my baby not coming? And then I'd hear in the back of my mind, someone saying, nature does what nature does. Your body will do what it needs to, but
Mm.
sometimes it needs help. And there's a reason why births are so much more successful nowadays than they used to be. It's because intervention's there, and that's okay. Use it. Don't risk losing.
Yeah.
And that was advice that one of my friends had given me because her natural birth hadn't gone according to plan, and so I had that in my mind during it.
Mm.
When I'm starting
Yeah.
to think, what am I doing wrong? It's like, no, you're not doing anything wrong. The planning and preparation, and it sounds so counterintuitive because on the one hand, you know, don't have a set in stone plan because
Mm.
you know you make plans, God laughs, kind of thing. But having gone through so much planning and preparation, I feel like I'm the sort of person that kind of wants to know what I'm getting into before I
Mm.
make a decision. So knowing that I already had some information about some of the things that might happen or could happen and what some of the options might be on how to work through that, even just understanding some of the terminologies, when the doctors are talking about things and they're saying words or they're talking about stuff, knowing, okay, I actually know a little bit about this,
Mm.
or they're saying this, I know that that's not a life or death thing right
Yeah.
now. It meant that there was just a little bit less processing I had to do at the time.
Mm.
um, and I guess that kind of weaves back into my husband in that I had planned and prepped, he'd planned and prepped with me, so we knew how to deal with certain things or what decisions we'd want to make if we could, and what were the definite hard no's and the hard yeses and the go with the flows. So I think that was a big thing.
Oh, so sorry. I think my head. Can you still hear me? If
Yes.
I use
Yeah.
yeah, perfect. I think another part is just kind of who I am. That sounds weird saying because I don't want to toot my own horn or anything, but
Oh, toot away, darling.
but I've always just I've tried and I'm not a purely go with the flow person. I have structure and routines and things I like doing, but I've always tried when I've gone through hardships, traumas, whether they be physical,
Mm.
emotional, social, situational, whatever it might be, I've always tried to find the the learn from it,
Yeah.
and to be able to look back. And I spend a lot of time going, okay, at this point in my life, I went through something that was really tough. But if I look at who I am now, how much has that influenced me? And then what have I learned and what have I gained? And, I've spent a lot of time being retrospective and introspective. And that's made it easier for me to kind
Mm.
of feel the way I do. It's also, I guess, a curse because it means I spend a lot of time inside myself dealing with emotions and thoughts. And sometimes you just want to shove them aside and be like, not now, Laura, I have other things to do. Um, but yeah, oh, and also my midwife. Um, I went through three, as I mentioned. I had my
Mm.
lovely midwife to start, and then her shift ended. And I had her colleague who I had met before, and then her shift ended. But the third midwife was someone that had run one of the birth classes. So I was really lucky that even though I went through three, I knew of or had contact with
Mm.
each of them, which was great. But having someone to advocate for you
Yeah.
beyond what your partner can was huge. All three of them were the bridge between me and what was happening. And as I said, and as you read in the poem, I had time with each decision to process that decision. And I think one of the really, really core moments that could have flipped the switch from transformed to traumatized was that moment where they said, we really think you need a cesarean. You know, your baby is struggling, you're exhausted. This is probably not going to happen. If at that moment they had said, you need to make a choice right now, are you going to do this? And I had felt like I had no option, I think I would have come out feeling very different. You know, when your own hand is forced, when someone else makes that decision and you lose that autonomy, it's really hard to move away from that. But I had an amazing midwife who, in that moment, stood up and said to the doctor, "Is this decision? Does this need to happen right this minute?" And he said, "No, we've got a bit of time and everything's a bit stable right now, but you know, this can't go for too much longer." And she said, "Okay, well, we need a few minutes." And she ushered everyone out of the room, and it was just me, my husband, and the midwife. And she just sat by my side. She held one of my hands, or my husband held the other, and him and I just talked. And I unloaded all of my, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to, I don't want to be cut. I don't want to be scarred. I don't want to be opened up. I want to feel it. I can do it. I can do it. And then, I was allowed to go from that to, but gosh, I'm tired. And I know that she's not okay. And then move that conversation to, I know I should. And I was given the time to work, sort of
Wow.
not process it, because you can never really process it that
No,
quickly.
no, but
I got to go on that journey for
yes.
a few minutes and have my husband say, it's okay.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to do is okay. And if, I know how you feel, and this is tough. Like, he was there with me and we could talk it through, and look, I don't know whether that was 5 minutes or 5 hours. Time was very relative when you go through it all, but just having those few minutes to be able to at least get to a point where I could be the one that said yes, even though I knew that was going to happen anyway.
Yes.
I just needed the moment and the time to make that decision myself, or at least vocalize that decision myself.
As a doula, I used to see what a big difference that made. Very,
It's
very
huge, and that
powerful.
there's
Yeah.
a lot of factors, as I've said, that contributed to how I feel now. But I think that was a really pivotal moment, and I got the opportunity to talk to that midwife, post the birth, and tell her that and say, oh my gosh, this moment, made or broke me, essentially. And I need you to know just how important that was. And I think, everyone has their own journeys with midwives and doulas and birth supports and however they want to do that. And for me, I didn't need someone necessarily to hold my hand through all of it. I didn't need someone to pat my back the whole time and say, you're doing great. Because I know I'm doing great. I can feel it. I've got this. I just needed someone to step in when times were tough and tell me it's okay. And, that I'm allowed to feel what I feel and give me time to do it. And yeah, I mean, there's probably so much more to it. And I will likely continue to unpack this for gosh knows how long.
Well, Laura, I just want to say a big thank you to you for being so generous with your story and your unpacking and your process of coming to terms with a birth that didn't go to plan. Laura's story is a powerful reminder that as humans, we make meaning. We frame stories, we take experiences, and then we put them in a story and a frame. And what Laura's done through the process of being really honest and raw and having people around who she can talk to who have helped her to continue to make sense of and to make meaning of. And as she's dealt with one part of the birth, then other parts sort of make their way forward, has helped her to process this in a very, very healthy, and I'm going to suggest to you quite quick, to be able to get to that place from going from plan A to plan B and even plan C. You've being able to do that so in such a transformative and empowered way. We often think that, the natural birth is going to empower us, but in my experience, I think all birth can empower us when we find a way to let that story rest peacefully within our soul and within our being. And that takes time, it takes process, it takes support. But Laura has done a magnificent job of helping us to understand that it's not the type of birth that matters, my darlings. It's what you do with it and what gets activated. And we can see through Laura's story a very powerful activation into parenting as well. So thank you all. This has been a bit of a longer episode, but well worth the listen. Thank you all for tuning in today. And a big thank you to Laura and little Riley, her little one, and her beautiful partner for sharing this story with us today. And we'll see you again next time.